Sixth grade, we're ready for the second half of lesson one. We got introduced to Egypt yesterday in the Nile River Valley. We talked about how the Nile River Valley flows north, the wind blows south, there's deserts all around, there's cataracts, and so pretty much grew up peacefully because there wasn't many invaders, and yet could still, obviously, number one, be attacked, but number two, get some trade out through the rivers and through this piece of land right here. Today we're going to pick up right where we left off to learn a little bit more about the landscape of Egypt and the people that started to grow up there. So you left off on page 103. We left off down here on our video as we're going through this, thinking like a historian. Let's talk about the people of the river. We know that the Mesopotamians controlled the floods of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to grow crops. They developed the technology to do so, but the unpredictable river constantly challenged them. In Egypt, however, the flooding of the Nile River was seasonal and consistent from year to year, so the Egyptians did not face the same challenge. So you got your first note filled in, guys. It's seasonal. What they're getting at is the Tigris and the Euphrates, you couldn't always predict when the floods would come and how bad the floods would be. And so if you remember last chapter, we talked about people dying or their houses getting washed away or not having enough water. In Egypt, it's much more consistent. You knew the time of year when the river was going to rise. You knew the time of year when it was going to settle back down. That's the seasonal, and it was like that just pretty much every single year, guys. Because it's so long, you're spreading out that water source far enough that, not that it wasn't still a challenge, guys, but it just wasn't the same kind of challenge at controlling it. So we'll see what the Egyptians did to master their river. As in Mesopotamia, flooding along the Nile in Egypt was common. The Nile floods, however, were more predictable and then less destructive than those of the Tigris and the Euphrates. As a result, the Egyptians were not afraid that heavy floods would destroy their homes and crops. Each year during the late spring, heavy tropical rains in Central Africa and melting mountain snow in Eastern Africa added water to the Nile. Around the middle of summer, the Nile overflowed its banks and flooded the land. Because it's so long, guys, this stuff is happening during late spring, but it's going to take literally a month for those rains and the snow melt from coming thousands of miles to get up to where most of them lived up here. Okay. Around the middle of summer, the Nile would overflow its banks and flood the land. Egyptian farmers were ready to take advantage of this cycle. When the waters returned to their normal level in late fall, thick deposits of fertile soil remained. So you got your second blank filled in there where you have those nice deposits of that fertile soil. The silt, if you remember from last chapter. What'd they do? Farmers planted wheat, barley, number 3, and flax seeds while the soil was still wet. Over time, they grew enough food to feed themselves and the animals they raised. And we'll talk about how this led to that surplus, guys, once again. We'll also keep pounding your head. These are staple crops. These are what we make breads out of. And so you got to grind them into flour and it'll last. Let's see how they figured it out. During the dry season, Egyptian farmers irrigated their crops. Number 1, they scooped out basins. So that's number 4 in your notes. What are basins? Basins are bowl-shaped holes. Now, guys, I don't want you to think like it's only the size of a bowl that I eat my cereal out of. This is like making a little pond. Might be a better way to think of it for what a farmer would do in that time. They dug these things out in the earth to store water. Then they would dig canals that extended from the basins to their fields, allowing water to flow to their crops. Raised areas of soil provided support for the basin walls. So you got to keep that in mind in ancient times, guys. We built these canals and things we built dams, but we built them out of mud. Okay, so with really bad floods, it would just knock those things and wash those things away. That's a challenge. In Egypt, it's not nearly as much. In time, Egyptian farmers developed new tools to make their work easier. For example, farmers created a shadoof, which is a bucket attached to a long pole that lifts water from the Nile and empties it into basins. Many Egyptian farmers still use this method today. So they have a picture of a shadoof, guys. You can see the long pole here and the string attached to the bucket. Now, sometimes, guys, this would allow you to do a couple things. Number 1, you didn't have to necessarily get in the river. If you had the pole out farther, you could control it from the pivot point that's not on this picture. Number two, they would usually tie a big rock to the other end of the stick so it worked like a teeter-totter, and that would allow you to lift more water than you could just lift with yourself because the rock is acting as a counterweight. Number three, it kept you away from the river, guys, because if you know anything about the Nile River, yep, there's crocodiles in it, and you might not want to be walking that close to it. But the biggest thing was less work. Scoop it up, swing it around, drop it into the basin, swing it back, and so that's all they do. And it's just interesting, guys, that even today they're still using that method despite all the technology we have with machinery today. We can obviously understand it back in the day. Okay, so back over here, number 5, farmers created a shadoof to help them fill up their water. Egyptian farmers also needed a way to measure the area of their lands. When floods washed away boundary markers that divided one field from another, farmers used geometry to help them recalculate where one field began and the other ended. So we get math involved, guys. Not over here on your notes yet, but it's just one of the reasons that Egyptians could build such things as big as a pyramid was they were very good at geometry. Egyptians also gathered papyrus. This is a reed plant that grew wild along the Nile. They used the long, thin reeds to weave ropes, sandals, into your notes now, baskets, river rafts. Later, they used papyrus to make paper. To do this, the Egyptians cut strips from the stalk of the papyrus plant, soaked them in water. Next, the strips were laid side by side and pounded together. They were then set out to dry, forming a large sheet of papyrus on which the Egyptians could write. So guys, this is literally where we get the word paper from. It's not nearly the same as it is for ours today. Their papyrus was made from this plant, but it was a little bit thicker and stronger, that when they made it, it was very, very tough. It wouldn't disintegrate like our paper would today. So now we got paper. Let's see what else they did. Like the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians developed their own writing system. At first, Egyptian writing was made up of thousands of picture symbols that represented objects or ideas. So we call those pictographs. I draw the picture of the word that I want. A house, for example, would be represented by a drawing of a house. Later, Egyptians created symbols that represented sounds, just as the letters of our alphabet does. The combination of pictures and sounds created a complex writing system called hieroglyphics. Okay, so number one, it's a combination of pictures and sounds. This gave us what we Egyptians hieroglyphics. So you got to keep it straight. Mesopotamia was cuneiform. Egyptian was hieroglyphics. We have finally, after thousands of years, cracked the hieroglyphic code. So we can say, hey, look at this. This is what it would, the picture they draw to give you the alphabet that we have today. And you'll see us work with that this week. Few ancient Egyptians could read and write hieroglyphics. Some Egyptian men, however, attended special schools to prepare for careers as scribes. Notice it's not in yellow because it was in yellow a couple chapters ago. In government or in business. So we have the job to get those things down. The Egyptians did not write on clay tablets like the Mesopotamians for their daily tasks. Egyptian scribes, fill in your blank for number 8, developed a simpler script that wrote on or painted on papyrus. These same scribes carved hieroglyphics onto stone walls and monuments. So the daily tasks, they figured out how to get them to go on papyrus, obviously a lot better than carrying around clay tablets. The things we want memorialized, guys, obviously you carve into stone. We still do that today. All right. Protected from outside attacks by desert barriers, Egyptian farmers were able to grow surpluses, extra amounts of food, remember from last chapter. In Egypt, as in Mesopotamia, extra food meant that some people could leave farming to work in other occupations. Artisans, merchants, and traders began to play an important role in Egypt's economy. As more goods became available, villages along the Nile traded with one another. Before long, Egyptian caravans were carrying goods to Nubia to the south, Mesopotamia to the northeast, and other places outside Egypt's borders. Along with the exchange of goods, Egyptian traders learned about the ways of life and government from other societies. So you're down here, we learn about life and government from other societies. So guys, this is one of the huge blessings of trade. As I come in contact with other civilizations, I'm going to learn what they're doing. And this is where I might get a good idea of their government and the things that they do, their education, their work ethics, their products. All that stuff happens through trade as this starts to go. So surplus leads to all kinds of really good things. The need for organized government became increasingly important as farming and trade increased. Okay, so you got the word important going in your blank here for number 10. Obviously, we're getting too big. We need rules. We need protection. So we have the important job of let's get an organized government. A government was necessary to oversee the construction and repair of irrigation ditches and dams. A government was needed to develop a process for storing and distributing grain during famines. Joseph from the Bible, right? In addition, conflicts over land ownership had to be settled. So I think you are planting in my field, you think I'm in your field, we're arguing about who has a property line. Somebody needs to decide the argument, and it's not just you and me because we can't figure it out. So boom, a government's going to come in and figure that out for us. All things we still use the government for today. Over time, groups of villages merged to form small kingdoms. Each of these kingdoms was ruled by a king. The weaker kingdoms eventually fell under the control of stronger ones, so that by 4000 BC, Egypt was made up of 2 large kingdoms. Number 11. One was Upper Egypt, which is located in the south, and the other one is Lower Egypt, which is located in the north. Okay, remember it's backwards because it's based on elevation. Narmer, the king of Upper Egypt, which would be in the south, about 3100 BC, he led his armies from the valley north into the delta. Narmer conquered Lower Egypt and married one of Lower Egypt's princesses, which unified the kingdoms. For the first time, all of Egypt was ruled by one king. Okay? So you got the word conquered from this paragraph for number 12. Narmer established a new capital at Memphis. It's a city on the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. He governed both parts of Egypt from this city. Memphis began to flourish as a center of government and culture along the Nile River. So if I go back, I think it made the map, guys. You can see Memphis way up here. Okay, so Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, he sets it up here as he goes together here. Nubia was mentioned in trade, guys. It made the map as well. Narmer's kingdom lasted long after his death. Number 14 in your notes. The right to rule was passed from father to son to grandson. Such a line of rulers from one family is called a dynasty. We do not have dynasties in America. It's not father to son ever. In a lot of European Middle Ages things, it went father to son. In the Bible, it was supposed to go father to son, yet David's line would be a good example of a dynasty because David's family line ruled for a while. But many times in the Bible, they didn't follow God, so he destroyed them. When one dynasty died out, another would take its place. Okay, so the only way we'd get a new ruler, guys, it would always stay father to son in the family unless war broke out and we overthrew it, or the dad died before he had any kids, and so the family line would be lost. From about 3,100 to 3,300 to 332, so almost 3,000 years, there is a series of 30 different dynasties that ruled Egypt. These dynasties were organized into 3 time periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. Throughout these 3 time periods, Egypt was usually united under a single ruler and enjoyed stable government. As we go on, guys, we'll talk about the differences in these kingdoms and when these periods end, and it's usually when Egypt was conquered. So we'd have where it would be in the Old Kingdom and go for a while, they'd get conquered for a while, then they'd come back and regain their freedom. Middle Kingdom, then fall apart, get conquered, come back, New Kingdom. Okay, and we'll talk those events next time. All right, that brings us to the end of Lesson 1. You have the worksheet that goes along with it, guys, for Monday and Tuesday. Blessings on it.